Rain tapped a weary rhythm against the single window pane. Not a storm, just persistence. The kind of drizzle that seeped into bones long before skin felt wet. October 22nd, a Tuesday. Eleanor marked the date in her mind, a useless habit now. Her father's birthday. He'd been gone 11 months. The apartment, small even for one person, felt cavernous tonight. Silence pressed in, thick and heavy, broken only by the relentless tap-tap-tap on the glass, and the low hum of the refrigerator, a sound she usually tuned out, but tonight it vibrated in her empty chest. How do you grieve someone when the grief feels like a ghost limb? Present being, but formless. She sat on the worn corduroy sofa, knees drawn up, a lukewarm mug of tea forgotten on the floor beside her. The only light came from the flickering screen of her laptop, casting long, shifting shadows on the walls. An unfinished work report glowed accusingly. Words blurred. Her throat tightened. She pressed the heels of her palms hard against her closed eyes, willing the familiar pressure behind them to recede. It didn't. A single tear escaped, tracing a hot path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. That's when she heard it. A soft scuffle. Barely there. From the direction of the bedroom. Eleanor froze. Listened. The rain, the fridge, and then nothing. Imagination, probably. The loneliness playing tricks. She let out a shaky breath, dropping her hands. The tear fell onto her sweatshirt sleeve, darkening the gray fabric. Another sound. Distinct this time. The faintest rasp of claws on the hardwood floor, hesitant, then retreating. But 3 weeks. That's how long the small, gray tabby had been sharing Eleanor's apartment, and her silence. Rescued from the city shelter, where she'd been found huddled, terrified, behind a dumpster. About 2 years old, the weary volunteer had guessed. Quiet type. Takes a while. Her name came from the pale, almost silvery patches that dappled her gray fur like moonlight on dust, and the way she seemed to dissolve into shadows. Her most striking feature was a distinct black smudge on her upper lip, like half a mustache. It gave her an air of perpetual, quiet surprise. Moth was a ghost cat. She existed on the periphery. She ate when Eleanor was asleep or out. She used the litter box with ninja-like stealth. Her preferred domain was the narrow, dark space under Eleanor's bed. She'd emerge occasionally, a silent streak across the floor to the water bowl, or to sit, statue still, in a patch of afternoon sun on the rug, vanishing the moment Eleanor shifted in her chair. Eleanor had tried. Oh, she tried. Soft words spoken into the quiet. Tempting treats laid out like offerings. Slow blinks sent towards shadowy corners. Moth would watch, wide-eyed, unmoving. Her green eyes held a depth that felt unsettling, like they saw too much. Then, she'd melt away. Back under the bed. Eleanor had begun to wonder if adopting her was a mistake. Another well-intentioned failure. Another silent presence echoing her own emptiness. Maybe they were just two lost creatures, orbiting each other in the dark, never touching. The tear on her sleeve felt cold now. The weight in her chest, the hollow ache of missing her dad, sharpened. It wasn't just the birthday. It was the 1,000 little absences. His terrible whistling in the morning. The way he'd always ask, "Did you eat?" even when she was 30. The safe, unquestioning certainty of his presence. Gone. Replaced by this void. And paperwork. So much paperwork. Probate felt like a brutal, bureaucratic autopsy on his life. A life insurance form glared from her laptop screen, demanding answers she didn't have. Cause of death. Policy number. Beneficiary information. Cold words. Final words. Another sob hitched in her throat, harder this time. She clamped a hand over her mouth, trying to stifle it. The pressure built, a wave threatening to break. She bent forward, forehead resting on her knees, shoulders trembling. The sound that escaped was muffled, raw, a guttural expression of the loneliness that lived inside the apartment walls. Inside her, silence descended again, heavy, broken only by Eleanor's ragged breathing as she fought for control. Tap, tap, tap went the rain. Hum went the fridge. Then, movement. Slow, careful. From the hallway, Eleanor didn't lift her head. She kept her eyes squeezed shut, lost in the gray fog of her grief. But her senses pricked. The air shifted. A presence. She heard the soft pad-pad of small feet on hardwood, stopping just beyond the reach of the laptop's glow. Eleanor held her breath. Was Moth just heading for the water bowl? Passing through? Seconds stretched. The only sound was the rain, her own heartbeat, and was that breathing? A tiny, almost imperceptible rhythm. Closer than it should be. Slow, very slowly. Eleanor lifted her head. Her vision was blurry with unshed tears. She blinked. At the edge of the rug, just outside the circle of light, sat Moth. Not poised to flee. Not crouched low. Just sitting. Her gray form was a soft smudge in the dimness. Her half-mustache was visible, her green eyes fixed, unblinking on Eleanor's face. Not wary. Not curious in the usual feline way. It was in observation. So, like she was reading the tremble in Eleanor's hands, the wet tracks on her cheeks, the slump of her shoulders. Eleanor stared back. She didn't move. Didn't dare breathe. This was the closest Moth had voluntarily come to her, ever. In the gloom, the cat's eyes seemed to hold a liquid understanding, a silent mirror reflecting the ache Eleanor carried. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Human and cat. Grief and whatever lived behind those watchful green eyes. The apartment held its breath. The rain softened to a whisper. The fridge hummed its oblivious tune. Without a sound, Moth turned. Her movement was fluid, silent. She didn't run. She simply walked, unhurried, back down the hallway. Towards the bedroom. Towards the safety of the shadows under the bed. But something had shifted. Eleanor felt it, a subtle crack in the icy stillness that had encased her apartment and her heart. The cat hadn't approached, hadn't offered comfort in any tangible way. Yet, the simple act of witnessing, of seeing her in that raw moment, of holding her gaze across the dim space, it felt significant. Like a silent acknowledgement. I see you. I see this. Eleanor wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. The crushing wave of sorrow hadn't vanished, but its edge felt different. Less isolating. She looked towards the dark hallway where Moth had disappeared. The silence wasn't just empty anymore. It felt shared. Waiting. A fragile thread, gossamer thin, had been spun in the space between the sofa and the shadows. A beginning impossibly quiet, but undeniably real. Something important, something delicate, had just stirred in the heart of the rain-soaked night. The rain stopped just before dawn. Eleanor woke to the pale, watery light of an October morning seeping through her blinds. She hadn't meant to fall asleep on the couch. Her neck ached, her mouth tasted stale, and the laptop had long since gone dark, still open to the unfinished insurance form. She sat up slowly, rubbing her stiff shoulders, and blinked at the quiet apartment. Something was different. Not the silence, that was still there, the same heavy quiet that had settled in after her father's death. Not the faint hum of the refrigerator or the distant sound of traffic outside. It was something else. A shift in the air. A presence. She turned her head toward the hallway. Moth sat there, not hiding, not slinking away, just watching. The small gray tabby was perched on the hardwood floor, her tail curled neatly around her paws, those wide green eyes fixed on Eleanor. No fear, no tension, just observation. Eleanor held her breath. Moth didn't move. 4 weeks, this cat had been a shadow, vanishing at the slightest sound, retreating into the safety of darkness. But now she was here, present, almost waiting. Eleanor exhaled slowly. "Hey," she murmured, her voice rough from sleep. Moth blinked. Slow, deliberate, a cat's version of a nod. Then, without breaking eye contact, Moth stretched, one delicate front paw extending forward, claws flexing, before settling back into her seated position. Eleanor couldn't explain why, but her throat tightened. It was such a small thing. A stretch, a blink, but it felt like a door cracking open. Breakfast was quiet as always. Eleanor filled Moth's bowl with kibble, set it down, and stepped back. Normally, Moth would wait until Eleanor had left the kitchen before creeping forward to eat. But this time, Moth walked right up. She didn't bolt, didn't hesitate. She just ate, right there, with Eleanor standing 3 feet away. Eleanor watched, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter. She didn't dare move, didn't want to break whatever fragile trust had formed in the night. Moth crunched the kibble methodically, her ears twitching at the sound of a distant car horn. When she finished, she sat back, licked her half-mustache once, and then she looked up at Eleanor. Not a fleeting glance. A look. Eleanor swallowed. "Good," she whispered. Moth's tail flicked. Then, as if deciding something, she turned and padded out of the kitchen. But she didn't go far. She stopped in the living room, sat down on the rug, and began grooming herself, one paw swiping over her ear, her tongue smoothing down the fur on her chest. Casual, unhurried, like she was saying, "I'm not hiding. Not right now." Eleanor's chest ached. Days passed. Small things changed. Moth no longer bolted when Eleanor walked into a room. She still kept her distance, but she stayed visible, curled up on the armchair while Eleanor worked, or perched on the windowsill, watching the world outside. And then, one evening, Eleanor came home from work, another long, numbing day of pretending she was fine, and found Moth sitting in the middle of the living room. Not hiding, not observing from a distance, just waiting. Eleanor froze in the doorway, her keys still in her hand. Moth's ears twitched, her tail curled, and then for the first time, she meowed. Not the tiny, uncertain chirp of a shy cat. A real, deliberate sound. A greeting. Eleanor's breath caught. She crouched slowly, holding out a hand. "Hey you," she murmured. Moth didn't approach, but she didn't run. She just looked at Eleanor, blinked once, and then turned and walked toward the kitchen. Eleanor followed. Moth stopped in front of her empty food bowl, sat, and looked back at Eleanor expectantly. Eleanor laughed, a startled, breathless sound. "Oh, that's why you're talking to me." Moth's tail flicked. But when Eleanor filled the bowl, Moth didn't immediately eat. She waited until Eleanor stepped back, then took a single bite before pausing and looking up again. Like she was making sure Eleanor was still there. Like she was saying, "This is for both of us now." The real shift happened at night. Eleanor had always slept fitfully since her father's death. She'd wake in the dark, heart pounding, the weight of grief pressing down on her chest. She'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, counting breaths until dawn. But one night, she woke to a different sensation. A warmth at the foot of the bed. She lifted her head. Moonlight spilled through the blinds, painting silver stripes across the comforter. And there, curled into a perfect circle at the edge of the mattress, was Moth. Not under the bed. On it. Eleanor didn't move. Didn't dare breathe. Moth's sides rose and fell in the steady rhythm of sleep. Eleanor's eyes burned. She lay back down, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft sound of Moth's breathing. And for the first time in months, she didn't feel alone. Mornings became something new. Eleanor would wake to find Moth still there, sometimes at the foot of the bed, sometimes closer, near her legs. Never touching. But there. One Saturday, Eleanor sat on the couch with a book, the autumn sunlight streaming through the window. Moth, after weeks of careful observation, finally did the unthinkable. She jumped up beside her. Not onto her lap. Not even touching her. But close enough that Eleanor could feel the heat of her small body, could hear the quiet rumble of a purr. Eleanor held perfectly still. Moth stretched out, her tail brushing Eleanor's thigh. Eleanor let out a slow breath. Then, hesitantly, she reached out and let her fingers hover just above Moth's fur. Moth didn't tense. Didn't pull away. Eleanor lowered her hand, gently resting it on Moth's back. The purr deepened. And just like that, something inside Eleanor's chest unclenched. But the most surprising thing? Moth had a habit now. A strange, inexplicable one. Whenever Eleanor was sad, when the grief hit too hard, when her throat tightened and her eyes burned, Moth would know. She'd appear. Not with dramatic affection. Not by climbing into her lap or licking her tears. But by sitting nearby. Watching. Staying. And then, when the moment passed, she'd leave. Not retreating under the bed like before. Just walking away as if to say, "I saw you. You're not alone." Eleanor began to wonder if Moth had always been this way, quietly attentive, fiercely present, but had simply been waiting for Eleanor to see her too. And then one evening, Moth brought her a gift. Not a dead mouse. Not a toy. But something far more surprising. Something that would change everything. The fragile piece, woven from shared glances, the quiet hum of a purr, and the comforting weight of a small gray body resting near her legs at night, began to fray at the edges. Winter deepened. December arrived, sharp and brittle, frosting the windows with intricate, icy lace. The world outside glittered under streetlights, festive and loud, but inside Eleanor's apartment, the air grew thick with a different kind of chill, the unavoidable approach of the first Christmas without her father. The grief, which had settled into a dull, manageable ache, surged back with vicious clarity. It wasn't just the absence of his laughter, his terrible off-key carols, or the predictable chaos of his gift wrapping. It was the silence where his booming voice should have been. The empty chair at the imaginary table. The crushing weight of knowing she had to navigate the season's relentless cheer alone. The insurance forms, the probate notices, the hollow finality of it all pressed in again, heavier than the snow gathering on the fire escape. Eleanor found herself retreating. Not physically, but emotionally. Work became a blur. Conversations felt like shouting through thick glass. She moved through her apartment like a ghost herself, the vibrant connection she'd found with Moth dimming under the shadow of renewed sorrow. She'd sit on the couch, staring blankly at the twinkling lights strung on the building across the street, feeling utterly hollow. The tears would come then, silent and hot, tracking paths she'd thought were long dry. And Moth knew. The little cat would materialize, just as she had that first night. Not purring, not demanding attention. She'd simply appear, sometimes on the arm of the couch, sometimes sitting quietly on the rug a few feet away, her green eyes fixed on Eleanor's face with that unnerving, deep stillness. She'd watch the tears fall, the shoulders slump, the silent tremors of grief. She wouldn't approach. She wouldn't meow. She'd just be there, a silent witness to the breaking. When the storm inside Eleanor subsided, leaving her drained and numb, Moth would often simply turn and pad softly back towards the bedroom. Her presence wasn't comforting in a conventional sense. It was more like an anchor thrown into the stormy sea of Eleanor's grief, a reminder that she wasn't entirely adrift, even in the bleakest moments. But then, something new started. It began subtly, almost lost beneath the low thrum of the heating vent or the distant sirens. A sound Eleanor couldn't quite place. A faint, rhythmic scritch, scritch, scritch. Like something small and persistent was working away at wood. At first, she dismissed it. Old building noises. Pipes settling. Mice? The thought sent a shiver down her spine, but she saw no evidence. Then, one late night, wide awake after a particularly brutal wave of missing her dad, Eleanor heard it clearly. Not faint, not distant. It was coming from her bedroom, and it was deliberate. Scritch, 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 scritch. Heart pounding for a different reason now, Eleanor slipped out of bed. The moonlight through the blinds cast long, skeletal shadows. She crept to the bedroom doorway, peering in. Moth was there. Not on the bed. Not under it. She was pressed against the far wall, the wall shared with the building's hallway. Specifically, she was focused on the narrow, louvered door of the small, deep linen closet tucked into the corner. An old closet Eleanor rarely used, filled with spare blankets, out-of-season clothes, and boxes she hadn't had the heart to sort through since her dad died. Moth was standing on her hind legs, her front paws braced against the closet door's wooden slats. Her claws were extended, and she was methodically, intently scratching. Not frantic, not playful, purposeful. Scritch, scritch, scritch. She'd scratch for several seconds, pause, tilt her head as if listening, then start again. Her tail was low, twitching slightly at the tip, her entire posture radiating a strange intensity. "Moth," Eleanor whispered, her voice husky with sleep and residual tears. The cat froze instantly. Her head whipped around, green eyes wide and startled in the gloom. For a second, she looked almost guilty. Then, with a flick of her tail, she dropped to all fours and darted, not under the bed, but into the dark mouth of the open closet itself, vanishing behind a stack of blankets. Eleanor flicked on the bedroom light. The sudden brightness felt harsh, intrusive. She walked to the closet door, peered in. Moth was a gray smudge deep in the shadows behind a box of winter sweaters, her eyes glowing like emeralds. Eleanor ran her fingers over the slatted wood where Moth had been scratching. The old paint was chipped. Beneath it, the wood itself was scored with fresh, pale gouges. Deep scratches. Recent. Very recent. "What are you doing, little weirdo?" Eleanor murmured, more confused than annoyed. She knelt, reaching a hand slowly into the closet. "Come on out. It's okay." Moth didn't move, just watched. Eleanor sighed, leaving the closet door ajar, and turned off the light. She climbed back into bed, the scritch-scritch echoing in her mind. It was just a cat scratching a door. Annoying maybe, but why that door? Why so focused? Over the next week, the scratching became a nightly ritual. Eleanor would lie in bed, listening. Sometimes it started late, sometimes in the dead quiet just before dawn. Always the same closet door. Always the same rhythmic, deliberate sound. She'd get up, turn on the light, and Moth would freeze, then bolt into the closet depths or under the bed. The scratches on the door multiplied. A small pile of paint chips and wood dust gathered on the floor beneath it. Curiosity began to gnaw at Eleanor, mixing uneasily with her grief. It felt intrusive, this strange obsession of moths. Was there a smell? A mouse? Or was it something else? Something tied, impossibly, to the sadness that seemed to trigger Moth's vigilante witnessing? One afternoon, Eleanor decided to investigate the closet properly. She needed to rule out pests, for one thing, and maybe, just maybe, understand Moth's fixation. Pulling the string for the bare bulb inside, the closet yawned open, smelling faintly of cedar and dust. She started pulling things out. Boxes labeled Dad's papers, sort later. Stacks of old quilts. A bulky winter coat. Moth appeared silently in the bedroom doorway, watching Eleanor's every move, her tail twitching. Not anxious, but alert, attentive. Looking for your mouse? Eleanor asked, hefting a box of photo albums. Moth just stared. Eleanor cleared the floor space near the back wall. It was just drywall, painted the same pale beige as the room, meeting the wooden frame of the closet. She ran her hand over it. Smooth. Solid. No holes. No marks. Nothing obvious. She sighed, leaning back on her heels. See? Nothing. Just a wall. She looked at Moth. The cat hadn't moved. Her gaze wasn't on Eleanor. It was fixed intently on the lower corner of the back wall, just above the baseboard. Right where the deepest concentration of scratches marred the closet door facing it. Eleanor frowned. She shuffled closer on her knees, peering at the spot. The paint looked slightly different? Smoother? Or was it just a trick of the dim closet light? She pressed her fingertips against it. It felt firm. But then, near the baseboard, her nail caught on the tiniest, almost imperceptible ridge. A hairline crack? Or just a flaw in the paint? Before she could investigate further, her phone rang sharply from the living room. Her sister, Lydia. The sound shattered the focused quiet. Moth startled and vanished. Eleanor's own heart jumped. The moment was broken. She answered the phone, forcing cheer into her voice she didn't feel. Lydia was talking about Christmas Eve plans, about bringing the kids over, about how they had to be festive for Dad's memory. Eleanor listened, her eyes drifting back to the closet. To that small, unremarkable section of wall Moth had stared at. The grief, momentarily displaced by curiosity, rushed back in, amplified by Lydia's forced enthusiasm. The thought of a noisy, cheerful family gathering in her silent, grief-soaked apartment felt suffocating, like putting a party hat on a tombstone. She interrupted, her voice tight. I don't know if I can do the big thing this year. It's just really hard. Silence on the other end. Then Lydia's voice, softer now, laced with concern, and a hint of that familiar frustration Eleanor dreaded. Oh, you can't just hide away forever. Dad wouldn't want that. We need to be together. The kids miss you. The pressure built behind Eleanor's eyes. I know. I need some time. Maybe just a quiet dinner? Just us. The compromise felt flimsy, a bandage on a gaping wound. Lydia sighed, a long, weary sound crackling down the line. Okay, I'll quiet dinner. But please, don't shut us out completely." The unspoken words hung heavy, like you're doing now. Like you have been. The call ended, leaving Eleanor feeling scraped raw. She sank onto the floor just outside the closet, the half-unpacked boxes surrounding her like silent accusations. The apartment felt colder, lonelier than ever. The fragile progress she'd made with Moth felt trivial against the vast ocean of her loss and the expectations of the living. Tears welled, hot and insistent. As the first sob escaped her lips, a soft pressure brushed against her arm. She looked down. Moth was there, not watching from afar. She had come close. So close Eleanor could feel the soft warmth of her fur through her sleeve. The little cat pressed her head firmly against Eleanor's arm, a solid, grounding pressure. Then she looked up, those deep green eyes holding Eleanor's tear-filled ones. There was no blinking slow reassurance this time. Just a steady, unwavering gaze. And in that gaze, Eleanor saw something fierce. Something protective. Something that mirrored the turmoil inside her, but also a strange, quiet determination. Moth held her gaze for a long moment. Then, deliberately, she turned her head and looked straight into the dark depths of the closet. At that back wall, her tail gave one sharp, decisive flick. The message was wordless, but it resonated through Eleanor's bones, cutting through the fog of sorrow and family tension. It's not nothing. The scratching, the staring, the focus. It wasn't random. It wasn't just a cat being a cat. Moth was trying to show her something. Something hidden. Something tied, inexplicably, to the sadness that drew her near, and perhaps, to the very grief that felt like it might swallow Eleanor whole. The tension in the small apartment snapped taut. The unexplained scratching was no longer just an annoyance. It was a mystery, a silent plea from a creature who seemed to understand Eleanor's pain in ways no human could. What lay behind that wall? And why was Moth so desperate to reach it? The quiet shift in their relationship had just taken a sharp, unexpected turn into the unknown, leaving Eleanor poised on the edge of a revelation she wasn't sure she was ready to face, but one she could no longer ignore. The grief had a companion now, not just in sorrow, but in a deepening, unsettling mystery. The days after the phone call with Lydia bled into a gray haze. Christmas decorations mocked Eleanor from shop windows. The scent of pine needles and gingerbread from the bakery downstairs felt like an assault. The weight of her grief, amplified by the tension with her sister and the gnawing mystery of Moth's obsession, pressed down until every breath felt like lifting a stone. She moved through her apartment like a sleepwalker, the untouched boxes near the closet a constant, silent accusation. Moth shadowed her, not with playful leaps or demanding meows, but with a quiet, watchful intensity. The nightly scratching continued, a relentless scritch against the linen closet door that now echoed the frantic scraping inside Eleanor's own chest. She'd lie awake, listening to it, the sound a physical manifestation of her unanswered questions, her unresolved pain. What was Moth trying to show her? Why that wall? The tiny ridge near the baseboard haunted her. Was it a crack? A seam? Or just the desperate projection of her own unraveling mind? The breaking point came on a bitingly cold Tuesday afternoon, 3 days before Christmas Eve. The promised quiet dinner with Lydia loomed, a suffocating prospect. Eleanor had tried, half-heartedly, to tackle one of the boxes labeled "Dad's papers, sort later." Bills, bank statements, receipts, mundane relics of a life extinguished. Each piece of paper felt like a shard of glass. She pulled out a faded electric bill, her father's familiar, slightly messy signature scrawled at the bottom. A sob tore from her throat, sudden and violent. She crumpled onto the floor beside the half-emptied box, the bill clutched in her trembling hand. The grief wasn't a wave anymore. It was a tsunami, crashing over her, pulling her under. Great, heaving sobs racked her body. She buried her face in her knees, the sound of her own anguish raw and ugly in the silent apartment. She was drowning. Drowning in paperwork, in memories, in the deafening absence where her father's steady presence should have been. Then silence. Not the absence of sound, but a sudden, profound stillness. Eleanor lifted her tear-streaked face, gasping for air. Moth stood inches away. Not sitting calmly observing. Standing. Her body was rigid, her tail held low but perfectly still. Her green eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed on Eleanor's face with an intensity that was almost frightening. There was no slow blink, no comforting purr. Just focus. A laser-like concentration radiating from the small gray form. For a long, suspended moment, human and cat stared at each other across the chasm of raw grief. Eleanor saw her own shattered reflection in those deep green pools. She saw the desperation, the unbearable weight. And she saw something else, an answer, a demand. Moth held her gaze. Then, with deliberate, unhurried movement, she turned. She didn't pad softly away. She walked with purpose towards the open closet door. She stopped just inside the threshold, silhouetted against the dim interior. She looked back at Eleanor, and then deliberately, slowly, turned her head to stare fixedly at that lower corner of the back wall. The spot with the tiny ridge. The word wasn't spoken, but it vibrated in the air between them. It wasn't a request. It was an imperative born of weeks of silent witnessing, of shared sorrow, of claws scraping against wood in the dead of night. Eleanor's sobbing ceased abruptly, replaced by a strange, hollow calm. The tears still streamed down her face, but the frantic energy was gone, replaced by a chilling resolve. Moth wasn't just a cat being odd. She wasn't chasing a mouse. This was something else. Something tied to the core of the pain that had drawn her near from the beginning. "Okay," Eleanor whispered, her voice raspy and broken. "Okay." She pushed herself up from the floor. Her legs felt shaky, but a strange clarity propelled her forward. She walked to the closet, Moth stepping aside silently to let her pass, her eyes never leaving the wall. Eleanor knelt on the dusty floorboards, ignoring the boxes crowding her. She focused solely on that small section of wall near the baseboard, the spot Moth had stared at. Up close, under the weak glow of the closet bulb, it was clearer. The paint was smoother there, slightly different in texture. And there, running vertically for about 4 inches, was a hairline crack. No, not a crack. It was too straight, too perfect. It was a seam. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She ran her finger along it. It felt deliberate, hidden. She pressed her fingernail into the seam. Nothing. She pushed harder. Still nothing. Frustration bubbled up, mingling with the grief and the absurdity of it all. Was she losing her mind? Chasing a phantom because a traumatized cat scratched a door? She leaned back, looking around the closet floor for something, anything, to pry with. Her gaze fell on a sturdy metal ruler sticking out of a toolbox her dad had left behind. She grabbed it. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she slid the thin metal edge into the seam. It slipped in easily, about half an inch. She wiggled it gently. Nothing. She applied more pressure, angling it downwards. There was a faint, gritty resistance, then a soft snick. A small section of the wall, roughly the size of a hardcover book, popped forward slightly. Not the drywall itself, but a piece of thin plywood or paneling behind it, expertly cut and fitted, painted over to blend seamlessly. Eleanor's breath caught. She dropped the ruler. With trembling fingers, she carefully worked her fingernails into the gap created by the ruler and pried the panel open. Behind it was a shallow recess. A hidden compartment, perhaps an inch deep, built into the wall framing. And inside, not a mouse nest, not insulation. Lying flat, nestled in the dusty cavity, was a small bundle of envelopes, tied together with a faded blue ribbon. They looked old. The top envelope was yellowed at the edges. Eleanor reached in, her hand shaking violently. She pulled the bundle out. It felt light, yet impossibly heavy. She sank back onto her heels, clutching it to her chest, the rough texture of the ribbon against her palm. Dust motes danced in the weak light. Moth moved then. She stepped closer, her small body pressing lightly against Eleanor's thigh. She didn't look at the bundle. She looked up at Eleanor's face, her green eyes wide, watchful, waiting. Eleanor stared down at the bundle. The handwriting on the top envelope was instantly, achingly familiar. Her father's. Strong, slightly slanted capitals. But the name made her blood run cold. It was addressed simply, "For Eleanor, when it's time." A choked sound escaped her. Not a sob. Something deeper, more guttural. When it's time. When what was time? Her hands trembled so badly she could barely untie the faded ribbon. It fell away. There were maybe a dozen envelopes inside, some thicker than others. The paper felt dry, fragile. She pulled out the top one. The envelope wasn't sealed. She slipped out the single sheet of paper folded inside. Unfolding it felt like opening a tomb. The date at the top stopped her heart. March 14th, nearly 2 years ago. Just after his initial diagnosis. The one he'd breezily called a minor hiccup. Her eyes scanned the familiar handwriting, the ink slightly faded. "My dearest Ellie, if you're reading this, then I guess the hiccup wasn't so minor after all. And I'm so sorry, so desperately sorry to leave you. I know I played it down. Stubborn old fool. Didn't want you worrying before you had to. Didn't want to see that look in your eyes, the one you get when you're trying so hard to be brave. Like you did when you were 7 and scraped your knee falling off your bike. You tried so hard not to cry in front of me. But Ellie, I knew. The doctors, they laid it out pretty clear back then. Odds weren't great. So I started writing these. Sneaky, huh? Found this old cubbyhole when I was fixing that leak under the sink last year. Seemed like a good spot. Private. I'm writing this first one right after they told me. Feels strange. Writing to you, knowing you won't read it until I'm gone. Feels like cheating, somehow. Stealing time. Mostly, I just want you to know it's okay. The sadness, the anger, the feeling like the world's gone crooked. It's all okay. Let yourself feel it. Don't bottle it up like I did when your mom passed. Bottling just makes it heavier later. You are the strongest, kindest, most capable person I know. You always have been. Even when you feel like you're crumbling, you're still standing. Remember that. Don't let the paperwork bury you. Ask Lydia for help. She'll fuss, but she loves you. Don't isolate yourself in this apartment, Ellie. It's just bricks and mortar. Your life, it's so much bigger than these walls. I'm rambling. Just to know I love you. More than anything in this world. Always have. Always will. Carry that with you. It's the only thing that really matters. I'll write more when I can. Things I want to say. Things I might forget. Be kind to yourself, sweetheart. Love always. The words blurred. The dam inside Eleanor, already cracked, shattered completely. A wail tore from her throat, primal and raw, echoing in the small closet. She doubled over, the letter crumpling in her fist, her forehead pressed against the cold floorboards. The grief wasn't a wave anymore. It was the entire ocean crashing over her, pulling her down into depths of sorrow she hadn't known existed. The apology, the love, the knowing. He'd known the whole time. He'd carried that burden alone. He'd planned for this, Frufter. She sobbed uncontrollably, her body convulsing, the sound a raw, animal thing of pure anguish. She cried for the father who protected her even in his dying. She cried for the conversations they never had. She cried for the loneliness he'd foreseen and tried, in his way, to mitigate from beyond the grave. She cried for the sheer, unbearable weight of love contained in that fragile sheet of paper. Through the torrent of tears, through the shuddering gasps for air, she felt it. A small, insistent pressure against her side. Solid. Grounding. The little gray cat had pressed herself fully against Eleanor's trembling body. Not just sitting nearby. Not just observing. She had curled her small form tightly into the curve of Eleanor's ribs, her head resting on Eleanor's arm. A steady, deep vibration began, a purr. Not the soft rumble of contentment, but a powerful, resonant thrumming that seemed to emanate from the very core of the small creature. It vibrated through Eleanor's bones, a counterpoint to the tremors of her sobs. Eleanor didn't pull away. She couldn't. She turned her face, burying it in the soft, dusty fur of Moth's back. She cried into the cat's fur, great, heaving sobs that soaked the gray strands. Moth didn't flinch, didn't try to escape. She held her ground, her purr unwavering, a constant, physical hum against Eleanor's shattered heart. Her small body felt like the only anchor in a world that had just tilted violently on its axis. In that moment, the connection wasn't just about shared space or quiet companionship. It was visceral, elemental. The silent witness had become the silent holder. Moth absorbed the tremors of Eleanor's grief, her purr a wordless lullaby in the storm. She didn't understand the words on the paper, but she understood the earthquake in the human beside her. She understood the scent of salt tears, the sound of a heart breaking, the desperate need for contact, for something warm and alive to hold onto in the crushing darkness of loss. Eleanor cried until she was empty, until the sobs subsided into shaky breaths and silent tears. She lay there on the dusty closet floor, exhausted, Moth still pressed firmly against her, still purring that deep, resonant purr. The bundle of letters lay beside her, the faded blue ribbons stark against the worn floorboards. The hidden truth was out. The carefully constructed facade of her father's minor hiccup lay in ruins. The grief was immense, a raw, gaping wound. But she wasn't alone. She felt the solid warmth of the small cat, the steady vibration against her ribs. She smelled the faint dust and cedar, mingled with the scent of Moth's fur and her own tears. She heard the low, continuous purr, a sound that seemed to fill the small space, pushing back against the silence and the sorrow. Moth had led her to the breaking point, and then, without hesitation, without judgment, she had simply stayed. She had become the ground beneath Eleanor when the world fell away. The silent promise in those green eyes, "I see you," had transformed into a tangible, purring reality. "I am here. You are not alone." The tears still fell, but they were quieter now. Cleansing. The emotional climax wasn't just the discovery, or the devastating words from her father. It was this, the raw, unfiltered expression of grief met not with avoidance, but with the fierce, purring solidarity of a small gray cat who had, against all odds, become the keeper of her broken heart. The mystery of the scratching wall had led to the shattering of one wall inside Eleanor, and in the rubble, a new, profound connection had taken root, forged in shared sorrow and silent, steadfast presence. The dust motes swirled in the weak winter sunlight filtering through the bedroom blinds. Eleanor lay on her side, facing the window, her body heavy with a profound, bone-deep exhaustion that felt different from the crushing fatigue of grief. It was the weariness that follows a long battle, a storm finally past. Moth was a warm, solid crescent pressed against the curve of her stomach, her small head resting on Eleanor's forearm, her purr a low, continuous thrumming that vibrated through the mattress, through Eleanor's ribs, steady as a heartbeat. It was mid-morning. Eleanor hadn't moved for hours, drifting in a strange limbo between sleep and wakefulness, the bundle of letters lying on the nightstand beside her, the faded blue ribbons stark against the wood. The raw, shattering agony of the discovery had subsided, leaving behind a landscape forever altered. The hidden compartment in the wall felt less like a secret revealed, more like a door blown open by a hurricane. Her father's words, the apology, the foresight, the sheer, staggering weight of his love expressed in that first letter echoed in the quiet room. I knew. Those two words changed everything. The minor hiccup had been a carefully constructed shield, a father's final, desperate act of protection. The guilt she'd carried, for not pushing harder, for believing his reassurances, for not knowing, hadn't vanished, but it had softened, reshaped by the understanding of his intention. He hadn't wanted her burdened with the ticking clock. He'd wanted her living, not waiting. Moth stirred, stretching one paw languidly, her claws gently kneading the comforter near Eleanor's hip. The purr deepened for a moment, then settled back into its steady rhythm. Eleanor shifted slightly, her fingers finding the soft fur between Moth's ears. The cat didn't startle, didn't pull away. She simply tilted her head infinitesimally into the touch, her eyes slitting open to emerald crescents before closing again. This ease, this simple acceptance of contact, was new. The apartment felt different. The silence wasn't oppressive anymore. It was contemplative. The shadows under the bed held no ghosts, only the memory of a cat who no longer needed them. The air, thick for months with unshed tears and stifled sorrow, felt lighter, clearer, scented faintly with dust and the clean, dry smell of Moth's fur. Eleanor looked around her bedroom, really looked, for the first time in months. The morning light fell on a framed photo on her dresser, her and her father, laughing on a beach vacation years ago, his arms slung around her shoulders. The sight didn't bring the usual stab of pain. It brought a pang, yes, a deep, resonant ache of missing him, but beneath it, woven through it, was gratitude. Gratitude for the man, for the time they had, for the words he'd left behind like buried treasure, found by a small, persistent gray guide. The paperwork still existed. The insurance forms, the probate notices, they still sat in a daunting pile on her desk. But their power over her had shifted. They were no longer symbols of an unbearable, lonely burden. They were just things her father had explicitly told her not to drown in. Ask Lydia for help. He'd known her tendency to retreat, to shoulder everything alone. He'd seen it coming even from beyond. Christmas Eve arrived, crisp and cold, the city outside buzzing with last-minute frenzy. Eleanor moved through her small apartment with a quiet purpose she hadn't felt in months. She'd cleaned. Not the frantic, avoidant scrubbing of grief, but a gentle, almost reverent tidying. The boxes from the closet were sorted. Her father's papers were organized into neat stacks: bills to pay, documents to file, letters. The precious bundle of letters placed carefully in her top dresser drawer to be read slowly, one by one, when she was ready. The hidden compartment remained open, the small panel leaning against the inside wall of the closet. She hadn't closed it. It felt important to leave it visible, a testament to the secret that had been kept and the one that had been revealed. Moth followed her everywhere. Not anxiously, but companionably. She sat on the kitchen counter, a new boldness, while Eleanor chopped vegetables for the simple dinner she'd planned. She perched on the arm of the sofa, watching with detached interest as Eleanor straightened cushions. She even ventured onto the cleared space near the open closet door, sniffing curiously at the exposed cavity before settling down nearby, her gaze occasionally drifting towards it, then back to Eleanor, as if ensuring the connection between the space and the human was acknowledged. When the doorbell rang at 6, a familiar jangle of nerves tightened Eleanor's stomach. She took a deep breath, smoothed her sweater, and glanced down. Moth was sitting calmly by her feet, looking up at her, those green eyes steady. Not hiding. Present. Eleanor opened the door. Lydia stood there, bundled in a puffy coat, her arms laden with a baking dish and a bag. Behind her, her two kids, faces pink from the cold, peered around her legs. Lydia's expression was cautious, tentative, braced for the brittle sadness she expected. "Hey," Eleanor said, her voice softer than she'd intended. "Hey, oh," Lydia replied, her eyes scanning Eleanor's face, searching. "We brought lasagna. And cookies. Obviously." She held up the dish. "Come in." Eleanor stepped back, holding the door wider. "It's freezing." Lydia ushered the kids in, their chatter immediately filling the small space. "Wow, Aunt, your cat," her nephew, Ben, exclaimed, spotting Moth, who had retreated a few dignified steps but hadn't vanished. "That's Moth," Eleanor said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time in what felt like forever. "She's shy, but she's getting braver." Lydia's gaze lingered on Eleanor. There was a difference, a subtle loosening around the eyes, a lack of that terrible, held-breath tension. "Look better," she said cautiously, setting the lasagna on the counter. Eleanor met her sister's eyes. "I feel different," she admitted. "Still sad. God, no idea, so sad. But less like I'm drowning." She didn't mention the letters. Not yet. That was hers and Moth's secret for now. But the sentiment behind them, the permission to not be okay, the urging to reach out, resonated. "Thanks for coming. For understanding about the quiet." Lydia's eyes softened. She reached out, squeezing Eleanor's arm. Always. Dinner was simple, quiet, but not strained. The kids chattered about school and Santa. Lydia talked about work, carefully avoiding any mention of their father. Eleanor listened, participated, even laughed softly at one of Ben's jokes. The crushing weight of festive expectation was gone, replaced by a simple, shared meal. Moth observed from a distance, the armchair in the living room, her eyes following the conversation, her ears twitching at the unfamiliar voices. She didn't hide. As Lydia was bundling the kids back into their coats, she paused by the door. "Seriously, she said, her voice low. "It's good to see you here. Present." "I'm trying to be," Eleanor said, leaning against the doorframe. Moth had appeared silently at her ankles, sitting upright, her tail curled neatly around her paws. It's a process. Lydia's gaze dropped to the cat. She's beautiful. Seems attached. Eleanor looked down at Moth. The little gray cat looked up at her, blinked slowly, deliberately. Then, with a grace that belied her skittish origins, she stood, stretched, and walked over to rub her head once, firmly, against Lydia's boot. Lydia chuckled, surprised. "Well, hello there." "She approves," Eleanor murmured, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the heater. After they left, the apartment settled back into its quiet. Eleanor washed the dishes, the rhythmic sound of water and clinking plates a soothing counterpoint to her thoughts. Moth resumed her position on the armchair, watching Eleanor move around the kitchen. The profound connection forged in the closet's dust, the shared breakdown, the purring solace, had settled into a deep, quiet companionship. Moth no longer only appeared when Eleanor was sad. She was simply a constant, grounding presence. Her hiding days seemed truly over. Eleanor dried her hands and walked into the living room. She stopped by the window, looking out at the twinkling lights strung across the street, the same view she'd stared at numbly weeks before. The hollow ache was still there, a space carved by her father's absence that would never truly fill. But it no longer felt like a void threatening to swallow her whole. It felt like a space where love had been, where love still resided, in memory, in words on fragile paper, in the steady purr of a small gray cat. Moth jumped down from the armchair. She padded silently across the rug and sat beside Eleanor's feet, looking not out the window, but up at Eleanor's face. Her green eyes reflected the colored lights, but their focus was unwavering. On Eleanor. Eleanor crouched down. She didn't reach out immediately. She just looked at Moth, really looked at this creature who had arrived as a shadow and become an anchor. This cat who had scratched at a hidden truth and then held her through the shattering of it. This small, resilient being who had sensed her deepest sorrow and responded not with fear, but with fierce, silent solidarity. "Thank you," Eleanor whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Moth blinked. So deliberate. Then she leaned forward, pressing the top of her head, the soft spot just between her ears, firmly against Eleanor's knee. The purr started again, a soft rumble that vibrated through the floor, through Eleanor's bones. It wasn't a dramatic healing. The grief was a companion she would carry always. But it was no longer the only occupant of her heart, nor the master of her days. Life was moving forward, irrevocably changed. The apartment was no longer a tomb of silence, but a space shared with a quiet, purring presence. The mystery of the scratching wall had been solved, leaving behind not emptiness, but a profound understanding and a bundle of precious words. The tension with Lydia had eased, replaced by a fragile, hopeful bridge. And Moth? Moth was no longer the ghost under the bed. She was simply sitting beside Eleanor at the window, her small body a warm weight against a leg, her purr a quiet testament to a bond forged in shared sorrow and silent understanding. The choice to open her heart, even amidst the ruins of grief, hadn't erased the pain, but it had made space for something else. Something warm. Something alive. Something purring softly in the winter twilight, anchoring her firmly in the present, in the quiet, changed aftermath. The breaking point had passed. The slow, tender work of rebuilding had begun, brick by purring brick. January arrived with a vengeance, clawing its way into the city with icy winds and sidewalks crusted with old snow. The holidays had passed, quietly, tenderly, leaving Eleanor standing at the threshold of a new year, one her father would never see. But the weight of that truth felt different now. The letters had shifted something inside her, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. She read them slowly, one by one, when the apartment was quiet and the light was soft. Some were dated, written in the months following his diagnosis. Others were undated, snippets of memory, advice, love. One contained nothing but a list of his favorite books and a note. "When you miss me, read these. I'll be in the pages." Another held a recipe for his infamous chili, complete with a scribbled, "Don't skimp on the cumin, Ellie. I mean it." Each letter was a piece of him handed back to her, a conversation stretched across time. She laughed. She cried. She pressed the paper to her chest like she could absorb the words through her skin. And Moth? Moth was always nearby. Not hovering. Not intrusive. Just present. A silent guardian of these fragile moments. She'd curl up on the armchair while Eleanor read, her green eyes half-lidded but alert, her tail twitching occasionally as if following the rhythm of Eleanor's breathing. Sometimes, when Eleanor's voice cracked reading aloud, Moth would stir, stretching before resettling closer, her purr a quiet undercurrent in the room. But the real surprise came on a frigid Tuesday night, the kind where the wind rattled the window panes and the radiator hissed like an angry cat. Eleanor was sorting through the last of her father's paperwork, finally tackling the mountain with Lydia's help, when she heard it. A soft thud from the bedroom. Not the usual scritch of claws. Not the light patter of paws. A deliberate, solid sound. She set down the stack of bills and walked down the hallway, her socked feet silent on the hardwood. Moth was sitting in the middle of the bedroom floor. Not near the closet. Not under the bed. And in front of her, placed neatly on the rug as if arranged with great care, was a small, crumpled piece of paper. Eleanor's breath caught. She knelt. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, folded haphazardly. It looked like it had been wedged into a crevice for years, forgotten. Moth looked up at her, blinked once, then nudged the paper forward with her nose. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she picked it up. She unfolded it carefully, the paper crackling with age. The handwriting was her father's, but messy, rushed. The ink was faded in places, as if damp at some point. "Found this old photo today. You were 6. Remember that trip to the lake? You caught your first fish and screamed when it flopped. God, you were so proud after. I keep it in my wallet. Funny how the little moments stick. I don't know if I ever told you, those are the things that matter. Not the big stuff. The in-between bits. The way you'd hum when you colored. The sound of your laugh when I'd toss you in the air. The way you'd always steal my fries when you thought I wasn't looking. Anyway, found this and wanted to say, thanks for all of it. Every second. Even the hard ones. Especially the hard ones." Tucked inside the folded note was a small, square photograph. Faded. The edges worn soft from handling. A little girl in pigtails, grinning wildly, holding up a tiny fish. A man beside her, beaming, his hand on her shoulder. Eleanor didn't remember the photo being taken, but she remembered the fish. The way it had glittered in the sunlight. The way her father had hooped, lifting her up like she'd conquered the ocean itself. She pressed a hand to her mouth. The tears came, but they weren't the desperate, drowning sobs of before. They were quieter, fuller. Moth stepped closer. She didn't rub against Eleanor's legs. She didn't meow. She simply sat beside her, her body a warm line against Eleanor's knee, her purr a steady vibration in the cold room. Eleanor wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. "Where did you find this?" she whispered. Moth, of course, didn't answer. but her gaze flicked toward the bed. Eleanor followed her line of sight. The bed frame was old, wooden, with a slight gap between the headboard and the wall. A place where things might slip unnoticed for years. Had Moth been exploring? Had she heard the crinkle of paper, the way cats hear the scuttle of insects in walls? Or had she simply known? Eleanor exhaled, long and slow. She smoothed the photo with her thumb. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice thick. Moth blinked up at her, slow and deliberate. Then, as if satisfied, she stood, stretched, and padded out of the room, leaving Eleanor alone with the note, the photo, and the quiet understanding that some gifts don't come with explanations. The next morning, Eleanor woke to sunlight streaming through the blinds. Moth was curled on the pillow beside her, something she'd never done before. Her small body rose and fell in sleep, her whiskers twitching faintly. Eleanor lay still, watching her. The gray fur, the half-mustache, the way her ears flicked at distant sounds. This cat, this quiet, mysterious creature, had unearthed more than just a hidden compartment in a wall. She'd uncovered pieces of Eleanor's father she hadn't known were missing. She reached out, gently stroking Moth's back. The cat didn't wake, but her purr rumbled to life, a sleepy, contented sound. Eleanor smiled. She got out of bed, padding to the dresser where she'd placed the photo and note the night before. She picked them up, studying them again in the daylight. Her father's words, his voice, so clear in the hurried scrawl. The in-between bits, the way you'd hum when you colored. She hadn't remembered that, but he had. She tucked the note and photo into the top drawer with the other letters, then paused. Something had changed. Not just in her, but in the apartment itself. The air felt lighter, the silence less hollow. The grief was still there, it would always be there, but it was no longer a boulder she carried alone. It was a shared thing, softened by purrs and unexpected notes and the quiet presence of a small gray cat who had, against all odds, become the keeper of her most fragile memories. She turned back to the bed. Moth had woken, stretching luxuriously before fixing Eleanor with those green, knowing eyes. Eleanor crossed the room, sitting on the edge of the mattress. She ran a hand down Moth's back, feeling the warmth, the life beneath her fingers. "You're a weird little miracle, you know that?" she murmured. Moth yawned, showing tiny, sharp teeth, then butted her head against Eleanor's wrist. And that was it. No grand gesture. No dramatic reveal. Just a cat, a photo, and the quiet understanding that love doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. Sometimes it's a letter hidden in a wall. Sometimes it's a note tucked behind a bed. And sometimes it's a small, persistent creature who scratches at the right doors until you're ready to open them. Spring came softly, the way it always did in the city. First as a whisper of warmth through the cracks of winter, then as a flood of sunlight that turned the sidewalks into mirrors. The snow melted, revealing forgotten things beneath. A lost glove, a crumpled coffee cup, the stubborn green of grass pushing through concrete. Eleanor sat by the open window, a breeze ruffling the pages of the book in her lap. It was one of her father's favorites, East of Eden, dog-eared and underlined in his messy scrawl. She could hear his voice in the margins, his notes like little conversations across time. Moth lay sprawled in a sunbeam on the sill, her fur glowing gold in the light, her belly exposed in a rare show of trust. Her paws twitched occasionally, chasing dream mice. The closet door behind them remained slightly ajar, the hidden compartment still visible, not as a wound, but as a testament. A reminder that some secrets, once uncovered, become gifts. Eleanor reached over, running a finger down Moth's back. The cat didn't stir, just let out a tiny, contented sigh. It had been months since the discovery of the letters. Months since Moth had led her to the photo, the note, the pieces of her father she hadn't known to look for. The grief hadn't vanished, it never would, but it had settled into something quieter, something gentler. A scar instead of an open wound. She closed the book, setting it aside, and pulled out her phone. Scrolled to a photo she'd taken of the lake picture, the one Moth had found. She'd framed the original, placed it on her dresser beside the one of her and her father on the beach. But she kept this digital copy for days when she needed a reminder of the fish, the laughter, the way he'd looked at her like she'd hung the moon. Moth stretched, rolling onto her side, blinking up at Eleanor with those knowing green eyes. "Yeah, I know," Eleanor murmured. "Sappy." Moth's tail flicked. Eleanor smiled. The apartment wasn't silent anymore. It hummed with the sound of Moth's purring, the tap of her paws on hardwood, the occasional chirp when a bird dared to land on the fire escape. It held the rustle of pages turning, the clink of dishes in the sink, the murmur of Eleanor's voice when she read her father's letters aloud, just to hear the words in the air. Lydia came over more often now, sometimes with the kids, sometimes just to sit at the kitchen table with coffee and talk about nothing. The tension between them had eased, replaced by something softer, forgiveness, maybe, or just the understanding that grief wasn't a race. It was a path you walked at your own pace. And Moth? Moth was no longer the ghost under the bed. She was a presence, a companion, a small, warm weight in the world. She still had her quirks, her sudden dashes through the apartment at 3 a.m., her obsession with the red dot of a laser pointer, her refusal to drink water unless it was from the faucet. But she was also the cat who curled against Eleanor's side during thunderstorms, who brought her crumpled receipts as gifts, who headbutted her hand when she'd been staring at her laptop too long. She was, in every way that mattered, family. On the first truly warm day of the year, Eleanor took the letters to the park. Not all of them. Just one. The last one in the bundle, the one she'd saved for today. She found a quiet bench under a tree, the kind her father would have liked, and unfolded the paper carefully. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were still clear. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And I'm sorry. Not for leaving, that's life, but for any pain I caused by not telling you the whole truth. I just wanted you to have as much joy as possible, for as long as possible. But here's the thing, joy doesn't end with me. It's everywhere. In the smell of coffee in the morning. In the sound of your stupid laugh. In the way the light hits the trees in the fall. Don't stop looking for it. Don't stop letting it in. And if you're reading this with some cat I know you eventually adopted, because let's be real, you've been a cat person since you were 5, give them a scratch for me. Animals know things we don't. Trust them. I love you, kid. Always will." A breeze rustled the paper, carrying the scent of fresh grass and distant grills. Somewhere nearby, children shrieked with laughter. A dog barked. Life, loud and vibrant, pulsed around her. Eleanor folded the letter, tucking it back into her pocket. She leaned back on the bench, closing her eyes, letting the sun warm her face. She wasn't okay. Not completely. Maybe she never would be. But she was here. Breathing. Living. Letting the light in. And that, she realized, was enough. That night, back in the apartment, Moth jumped onto the bed and settled herself against Eleanor's legs, her purr a steady, grounding rhythm. Eleanor reached down, scratching behind her ears the way she liked. "He would have loved you, you know," she murmured. Moth blinked up at her, slow and deliberate, as if to say, I know. And maybe she did. Maybe in some way she always had. A final note for you, the reader. Grief is a strange and solitary thing. It carves hollows in us, leaves us gasping in the dark. But sometimes, it brings unexpected gifts. A letter hidden in a wall. A photo tucked behind a bed. A small, persistent creature who scratches at the right doors until we're ready to open them. Moth wasn't just a cat. She was a bridge, a guide, a quiet, purring reminder that love doesn't end, it just changes shape. And Eleanor? She wasn't just a grieving daughter. She was proof that even the most shattered hearts can heal, piece by piece, when we let the light in. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Comment below. Have you ever experienced a bond like this? What unexpected gift has helped you through grief? Subscribe and hit the bell icon for more emotional, real-life stories that remind us of the quiet miracles in everyday life. Share this story. Someone out there needs to hear it today. Because sometimes, the smallest paws leave the biggest prints on our hearts. Goodbye for now, but the next story is just around the corner. Forwards.